I will never understand how we ended up losing LG in the cell phone category. This phone has been out for exactly 4 years at the time of writing this, but people still don't give up on it. There's a huge following for this flawed phone, but that's thanks to having things that some phones have, as well as others no phones have. Let's talk about the LG V60 ThinQ. Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review, and today we're looking at the V60 again, a phone that I still see people commenting about. Let's get started. Now let's get this out of the way because, let's also be honest, a phone from 2020 that is made by a company that doesn't make phones anymore is concerning. But even now, people won't give up this phone. I bought this phone a year ago, and even now this phone sells for around that same price that I bought it. Under $200 is a good price, but the reason why people buy it is for more than that. Let me tell you about the perks and gimmicks, and I'll let you decide if they are perks or gimmicks. There are 4 cameras total, but actually just 3. The front camera is a focusable 10 megapixel camera which allows for 4K at 60 frames per second, video-wise. Promising camera that produces okay to good shots and video. The rear cameras start with a 64 megapixel focusable and optically stabilized wide camera, the only camera that features both of those things. Here we get 4K at 60 frames per second video-wise, as well as an odd 8K camera that can go up to 26 frames per second. It feels like 24 or lower, but it does allow for 26 frames per second, apparently. Personally, I don't think that these video options look that good, but there's possibly some ways to tweak it to make it look good. The manual mode has a ton of features including bitrate, which tells me there's a way to get 96 megabits per second for using HD, but 4K 60 goes up to 80 megabits per second. For context, my iPhone 14 Pro shoots at 50 to 60 megabits per second, so the option for good video is there on the V60. I'm just not sure how to modify it to make it look nice. The normal camera looks fine. It has that LG look to it, which is pretty much warm, but then also softened as if almost all the pictures are being taken with a night mode. It's hard to explain, but it's kind of easy to see that some shots are just off, and night shots do end up just falling apart. I would say good camera, not bad, but I generally don't use this as a camera. Then we get a 13 megapixel ultra wide camera, which is weird because it's not focusable. That means there's no macro option, which wasn't a big deal back when this phone was released, but it makes the last camera even more disappointing. The image created on this is similar but not the same as the main camera, but complements the main camera. I'm not really a fan of ultra-wide cameras, but it's not too bad besides the lack of the macro option. This maxes out at 4K 30 frames per second video, but you can use this in manual mode, something I wouldn't have expected. To me, pretty much all ultra-wide cameras on phones look bad, and this is no different. Lastly is this useless time-of-flight sensor. Yes, a sensor does make it a camera, but calling it a triple camera setup is definitely misleading. This is a 0.03 megapixel camera that is used strictly for capturing data and not something that you can actually use as it's used for portrait mode. At the end of the day, these cameras aren't terrible. There's some perks, but overall for me, very gimmicky. The next thing is the headset jack. I did my research on this and the end result was gimmick. Look, I understand there's a quad DAC that's in here, specifically the ESS ES9219. So I bought this adapter to try with a few headphones, and again, no difference. This adapter has the ESS ES9318 chip in it, a slight upgrade that objectively may or may not be true, but I have tried. I have done the limited research I can to earn the right to call it a gimmick. And look, if you still don't believe me or don't want to agree with me, find me some good in-ear monitors that I can test. I have no problem making another video comparing my Zenfone 9 headset jack, the one on the V60, and the USB-C DAC that I bought. Until then, gimmick. Then the last one is the dual screen, and honestly, I gotta say it's ultimately a gimmick, but I understand why people like this now. There is a pen option, by the way, but I couldn't find an OEM one for a reasonable price. I'm also not a drawing person, but I did find this post that explains which ones are good for the phone and what you're missing depending on which ones you buy. Ultimately, look for AES support. Back to the screens, it's cool having 2 apps to set up, but having a notch on the left screen, it's stupid. Why did they do that? Also, using both screens partially blocks the volume buttons, making the whole thing awkward, even though they have separate volume buttons, which are technically lower. When you close the case, unless you set it to always show something, you get a notification saying dual screen can't be used. Every single time. I got it the first time. Stop showing me. This naturally blocks the rear cameras when closed like this, and obviously the front one when fully closed. Meaning that if you want to use both sets of the cameras, you have to open it like this. It can be cool, but also makes you look like you barely know how to use a phone in the first place when it's open like this. And don't tell me you've never judged someone for taking a picture like this. It looks like someone using an iPad to take an eye-level picture. But the display does have some cool features, kind of reminding me of the ZTE Axon M, but obviously bigger, with a bigger split. And yes, you can expand the image across both screens, but it doesn't really look that good. You can surprisingly play 2 games at a time, with very little processor hit, but this probably maxes out the processor at the same time. Honestly, this feels like an alpha version of something like a Samsung Fold, but I can see how it can be cool. You can actually set it up to open up an app like YouTube when you open up the screen, something that makes sense given that this shouldn't be used for everyday tasks. As for the construction, it's okay. I actually opened up this thing because the screws were loose, but even then this thing still feels super plasticky, which it is. And when it's closed, we get this tiny always-on display, which is nice, but I do wish it was a touchscreen. Instead, it's a black and white screen with a large pixels and icons to show notifications, and that's it. When it comes in, it doesn't show the words, just the icon. One thing I hate about this case is that the phone does not support Face Unlock, meaning that when you open up the phone, you can't just use it. You have to open it up, swipe in, type your password, or put your fingerprint on. It just slows down the usage for something that's supposed to be for power users. As for charging, this connects to the USB-C port, meaning that you need a special charging adapter or cable to charge it in the first place, but at least it still works at the normal speed. As for data, I'm using an aftermarket adapter, but it seems like it is just USB 2.0 speeds, which makes sense given that this isn't common for people to do with the case on. Pretty sure it would have to have more than 5 pins on each side to do 3.0 or higher speeds. Also, this does not allow for power out for some reason, so if you want to charge other phones, you would have to take the case off. I personally wouldn't recommend keeping the case on because it almost feels like you wouldn't want to leave this case on and use it. But then there's some things like the charging that make it feel like you can leave it on all the time. What's the intended use case for this? We'll never know, I guess. All I know is that this is a gimmick, but I do find it to be useful at times. What do you think though? Are these actual gimmicks or game changers? I briefly explained some things, but now I can explain the whole phone. Front and back are Gorilla Glass 5 and Gorilla Glass 6, respectively, with the screen featuring a notch and low in-screen fingerprint scanner, while the back has the cameras and flash, and that's it. There's a hidden mic here, but you get the point. The frame of the phone is aluminum, even if it seems like a plastic one. I think it's just a Verizon thing, but it does hide the antenna bands, which allow for Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth 5.1, and 5G with ultra-wideband support if you do have the Verizon one, like I do. The top has another microphone as well as a SIM card and SD card slot. The right side is where the power button is, while the left side has the volume buttons, another mic, and the assistant button, which you can turn off. Then on the bottom we get the headset jack, one more microphone, a USB-C 3.1 port, and a loudspeaker. This one pairs to the earpiece, meaning we get okay stereo speakers, so I guess that maybe makes the headset jack a good thing. Speaking of that USB-C port, this allows for 25 watts of wired charging into that 5000 milliamp cell, as well as wireless charging. By the way, this phone is supposed to be IP68 dust and water resistant, something I wouldn't test 4 years after its launch, as well as military standard 810 certified, something I still wouldn't want to test, ever. It's a large phone with metal and glass adding up to 219 grams, which would not be good if it got into a fight with the ground. Powering the phone from the battery is a Snapdragon 865 chip, which is getting old but still plenty powerful. This is paired with 8GB of RAM and 128GB of obviously expandable storage. Running Android 13 is nice to see here, though I don't really notice too much of a difference from Android 12. This one hasn't been updated in over 8 months, so I assume that it's reached end of life. Not sure of any phone that has this chip in Android 14, so I guess that's not really a bad thing. All of this powers the 6.8-inch 1080p OLED panel that's on the front, which honestly looks plenty bright at about 500 nits and plenty vibrant, but 60Hz does feel strange. Honestly, I feel like I'm reminded that it is 60Hz, and by that I mean I don't really notice it too much as operations are clunky at times, but smooth during others. This phone is dated, but not to the point where I would write off this phone as a do not buy. The screen, while only 1080p, is huge and actually looks pretty good. The battery life is clearly degrading, but still not that bad. Charging speeds feel fast, but not 25 watt speeds for some reason. Again, the main appeal of this phone was in the last section, but the specs given to this phone are not bad in any way. Even the 60Hz options, which weren't on many phones when this phone came out. This was right before companies started switching to 90 or 120 Hz screens. I like it, but also the phone can be kind of boring without the gimmicks. And that's what LG seems to have been, a gimmick machine. It's well known that LG lacks brand identity. I mean, even with WebOS on their TVs, that came from Palm. Numerous features from old phones were tested and taken away from these phones, though they're not alone. I mean, we can look at every other company and see that there were some things that were taken away, like the things that the Samsung S5 through the S20 had, or what iPhones looked like from the 6S to the 11 series. But for LG, it always felt like they stuck major features into their phones for 1 year and then they were gone the next. Except the V series. Sure, the V10 to V30 seem like they were the odd man out, but the V30 to V60 are just the phone maturing into what we have now. In a way, the rear design is the V series design, but that isn't what set a phone apart. The quad DAC seemed to be the true LG part, and for some it's worth it, but for people like me, it's boring. This was LG's last try at phones, something we knew was going to end at some point when we saw major warranty recall programs and just the overall fact that LG's profits on phones were very low in the first place. Mix that with low sales and it becomes a recipe for disaster. And here we are now, with people looking at premium LG phones and wishing that they would come back. LG wasn't afraid to risk it when making new products, trying to make something new or special to get new customers. Unfortunately, it did have to come to an end, even though now people seem to enjoy LG, even with the software update worries. And unfortunately, with Google and now Samsung promising long-term update timelines for their newer phones, we are in the phone landscape that LG will never enter back into simply because the cost to upkeep these devices would just be too much. It's sad to see LG leave, at least the premium side. While new LG phones are gone, the used marketplace has always been there. It's easy to find this for under $200, but the pen and dual screen kind of make this a pointless purchase. The case alone can be found for, let's just say, $70 plus. Amazon ones are outrageous, being almost as much as finding a used version of the phone, then whatever the pen costs, which I can barely find for $60 plus. Most cases don't come with a charging adapter, and mine was $20 with an extra cable. So this whole setup would cost like $270 plus or $330 plus with a pen. Comparing apples to Samsung, a Samsung Z Fold 2 is missing the pen option for a little over $320, while a better Z Fold 3 that supports the $30 on Amazon S Pen starts at the mid $350. So the real question is, do you like LG, SD card, and quad DAC support that much that you can't give up those options for a better phone experience? It's a tough choice, but for me, the dual screen and pen are not important at all, just like the headset jack. But again, I paid less than $200 for this flagship device, and honestly, I enjoy using it, even with its quirks like blacking out the screen for the fingerprint scanner. I don't get why they never fixed that. And that's my review of the LG V60 ThinQ. Hopefully you enjoyed. Check out the comments or leave one. And as always, thanks for watching.